So, where were we? We were all like in the middle of doing something, saying something, and all of a sudden the thing happened, and we were rudely interrupted by 16 months worth of virtual living. Virtually living, it used to mean that you were doing something that approximated living, that was next to living, that was like living, but was not living. But now that we've all spent the last year and a half living in a society where our very presence has been defined by the quality of our pixels, I think we would all agree this is living. 16 months, that's how long it's been since I last performed in front of people who themselves were performing the previously innocuous, but now daredevil activity of breathing the same air at the same time on the same roof as me. And you know where it was that I performed that last show? It's right here. This is where I performed it. And there's been a lot of changes between back then and right now, chief among them being that back then I would never begin a show by quizzing the audience about where and when I last performed. And some of you were there for that, and some of the people who were there on March 7th, 2020 are not here now because you don't need to be. That's one of the big changes, right? We got these cameras. We got two cameras on either side. We got a camera right there. Joey in the back is switching between them. The whole host of people who are in this room with us, who are spirits in the material world, or ghosts in the machine. This is not so much a show. It is more of a seance. And we are conjuring the spirits of these people from all across this great world of ours. And we welcome their presence into this room with us. And some of these people, and some of you have been with me for this entire series of shows that I've done, which I started exactly 1 year ago from the back door of where we were staying in Montauk, New York. A show that I would broadcast entirely new and original every 5 to 6 weeks. A show I would call Right Now because it was about right now and still is about right now. A show that was meant to sort of like help us all deal with the isolation that comes with mandated social distancing. And now here we are, July 27th, 2021. We've come full circle, and when you come full circle, it can look like you haven't come anywhere at all, right? It's a little bit confusing by all appearances. It all kind of looks the same. Like if you were a time traveler, this would be very, very confusing. If there was a time traveler who got into their time machine at the very end of my last show on March 7th, 2020, and set the dial for July 27th, 2021, and then stepped out right now with the smoke and the whirring of gears and everybody in the audience being like, oh my God, you know, and me trying to say like, oh, this is not part of the show, but of course that would be incorrect, you know, it is part of the show. Like, look, we've all spent the last 16 months watching Netflix, watching streaming, watching movies where everything's so perfect. All the editing, all the lighting, all the actors, wonderfully perfect people. But the price for that perfection is that all of these pieces of art are inert. They're of the past. They're dead. Unlike this theater, which is live. We're all in this room right now, and there are people who are in other rooms with us also breathing air at the exact same time as us. And I say all this knowing full well that time travel is not possible, right? Time machines, physicists tell us, don't expect them, but of all the things in the universe that are impossible, the one thing we should be ready for at any moment is the appearance of a time machine, because there will be no warning. All of a sudden it'll just appear in the room from some other time where time travel is possible. And a time traveler will step out, a beautiful woman, a beautiful time traveler, and she will look at me, and she will then look back at you, and she will say, oh my God, he's still talking, you know? And I'll be like, no, there's been 16 months, and we'll have so many questions for this time traveler, right? Well, it'll be like, you know, why? Of all the places you could have gone in the history of time, back to the dinosaurs, back to to see the birth of Jesus Christ, to see whether he ever really existed. You've instead chosen to just hop in your machine between my shows, which I fully support, and I'm very happy that you are doing so. But of course, I'd like to explore exactly why, but we can't because the front of house staff, right? We'll come running down, and this is why you have a front of house staff. You know, I haven't had a front of house staff for the 10 shows I've done from the back door of the house in Montauk over the past year, the whole time worried that the impossible might happen and a time machine might suddenly appear and I wouldn't know what to do with that because I don't have a front of house staff, unlike here, who will come down and ask this beautiful time traveler the question that we actually all really do want to know, more than the dinosaurs, more than Jesus Christ. We'll ask the time traveler, have you been vaccinated? And the time traveler will say, I don't know what you mean. And then the front of house staff will explain, well, you see, everybody in this room with us has been vaccinated. That's why we're all comfortable being in this room together. That's how we know everybody in this room is a good person. Despite the fact that, like everybody, they felt a little uneasy about getting inoculated with a strange serum made by some magical scientist somewhere else, but they understand that they are part of the fabric of society and that sometimes you have to put your own fears aside and do something for the good of everybody. And on top of that, also, it will save your life. Really shouldn't be that complicated. And the time traveler will be like, no, I'm not vaccinated. And immediately, she will be marched right off to that corner of the theater. You who are watching this in the cameras, you can't see, but there's a very dark corner of the theater back there. That's where we keep the serum. That's where we keep the dirty needles. They don't come to us dirty. They come to us in sterile packets, but we open them up before the show, right? And we spill them onto the moist carpet in that dark corner back there. The carpet doesn't start off as moist, but we've got water bottles, and we empty them up. And when I say we do this before the show, I mean we do this 3 days before the show as we open up mayonnaise packets onto these needles to make them good and dirty so the mayonnaise can crust over them. We don't want the needles to be dirty, but we feel we have to, because nobody else in the East Village is keeping true to the heritage of this neighborhood by keeping dirty needles on hand. You walk outside this theater onto East 4th Street, you look up and down, you see nothing but beautiful bars and restaurants and beautiful people in their 20s who should be at home right now having sex with each other, but instead they're in restaurants, each wondering what the other is gonna order, you know? And I've gone up to them and tried to tell them, just go home, have sex, but they don't want you to say that anymore. So I don't, right? And the time traveler sits back down, you know, and confesses to all of us, I feel a little woozy now. And we all say, oh, well, that's to be expected because your DNA is being rewritten as we speak. And the mitochondria in your cells are being transformed into tiny little 5G cell towers beholden forevermore to the whims of AT&T and Sprint and Nextel, which, like, nobody remembers Nextel. I just throw that in for my own amusement because long ago in a different life, I bought some stock in the company of Nextel. Because Nextel, they said that, like, our phones are not only phones, but you push a different button and they become walkie-talkies. I was like, wow, you know? And only now do I realize that phones they're walkie-talkies already, right, you know? But I would like to believe that Nextel has been playing the long game here, right? And that they've started this virus so that we one day will have to be inoculated with a serum that will be holding us to them to turn us all into walkie-talkies, you know, which of course is just a perfect way of describing human beings anyway, right? We walk and we talk. And the time traveler will say, I'm sorry, I've interrupted you, please go on. And we'll look at me and she'll be like, what did you miss? And I, you know, she's looking at me, not that I know more than you, this is all of our story. Like, we've all spent the past year and a half, you know, it's just that, like, the lights are pointing in my direction. And so I will feel obligated to answer for all of us. And I'll be like, oh my God, what did you miss? I'm like, well, where do we begin? And she'll say, well, I don't know, why don't you begin at the beginning? And I'll be like, which beginning? And she'll be like, well, I got in the time machine at the end of your show on March 7th, 2020. What happened next? And I'll be like, I think next we went to a bar down the street, you know? And she'll say, continue. And I'm like, wow, this is gonna take a while, you know? And a lot of people will ask me, like, what's the worst part about performing a show in New York City. And when I say a lot of people ask me, understand, nobody asks me that. Not just because of social distancing, no one has been able to ask me anything, but also because I think everyone assumes that the hardest part about doing a show in New York City is doing the show in New York City. It's not, though. The hardest part is right after the show. I don't mean back when I'm in the dressing room, looking at myself in the mirror, wondering if any of this meant anything to anybody. It's instead the moment right before that, but right after I've bowed to end the show. Because when I do a show in New York City, invariably, I have friends and family in the audience. And they will want to say hi, they will want to say good job, and I will want to hear them say hi and good job. And so I have to suggest the place that we all go out to get a drink. And on March 7th, 2020, I said, well, why don't we all go down the block to Phoebe's? Look, I have a child at home who's one at the time, and I don't go out in the East Village, and I don't know bars, and particularly on a Saturday night, but I do know Phoebe's because I went to my friend Dave Way's 30th birthday party there. Now, Dave Way and I are the same age, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I'm just going to say you can count the number of decades I am on just one hand, okay? But barely on one hand. And so, everybody heads down to Phoebe's, and I can't go with them. It always takes me 20 minutes to, look in the mirror and have my crisis of uncertainty. And I'm going to describe what happened next in terms that I think will best connect with you. Everything happened to me, but let's just say it as if this is a nightmare you are having. A nightmare, you're tossing and you're turning in bed, then you're having a nightmare where for some reason, you've thrown an impromptu party for yourself at a bar you have not been to in 20 years, and to which you have sent 20 of your friends and family, none of whom know each other, and you will arrive at this bar after everyone else has gotten there. And so when you enter, it's weird. It's almost like a surprise party you've thrown for yourself. Everyone's standing there in this bar that is exactly as you remember it being 20 years ago, except for the fact that they have invested heavily in their sound system and in a resident DJ. It was playing the music incredibly loudly, not so that anyone might be dancing, because no one is. Purely, obviously, their hope is just that everyone should be screaming. And everybody is. So when you enter, it sounds like the whole bar is in a fight with itself. And your 20 friends and family who do not know each other in this nightmare, they're all looking at you with very dour faces. Faces that indicate to you they just want to say good job and then leave. Nobody's taken off their coats, but to go through all 20 will take too long. So you push through them to go to the back room, which isn't really a back room, it's a side room. It's just as loud in there, and there's a waitress there in your nightmare. And you say to her, look, there are these tables, nobody's sitting in them. Could we please sit in these tables? And she says, well, will you order some food? And you'd be like, it's 10 p.m., maybe one or two people, but we're just going to order drinks. And the waitress says, okay, you can sit down. And everybody does. And for a moment, it seems that maybe this isn't a nightmare. Maybe this is just a bad dream. And everybody orders their drinks, and two people order dinner. And once the orders are in, the nightmare waitress comes back over and says, actually, if everyone isn't ordering food, you're going to have to stand up. And so everyone has to stand up next to their empty seats that nobody sits in for the rest of the night, because in this very loud bar, nobody's having dinner at 10 p.m. And you feel this anger inside of you. You want to march out of this bar and make a statement, but you know that the only nightmare worse than throwing an impromptu party for 20 friends and family who do not know each other in a bar you haven't been to in 20 years that's incredibly loud would be leading those 20 people on a failed march between bars in the East Village on a Saturday night, in and out, trying to find a place for everyone to sit. So instead, you just stand up and you make an announcement to everybody. And you say, everybody, change of plans. We're just not going to have fun. So all the pressure's off. It should be very easy to adopt that plan. And you sit there and you look at those chairs until eventually you say out loud, not that anybody can hear you, but it's not to anybody, it's to the spirits, it's to the genies. You say, a pox on this house, a pox on these tables and chairs may it be, that nobody sits in these tables and chairs, not just for the rest of the night, but for the foreseeable future, however long that might be. And as it turns out, the foreseeable future is 16 months and counting. Am I saying that I am responsible for this virus? Well, of course not. That's not how the world works. And yet I was brought up on all the same children's books that surely you were brought up as well, where the little children protagonists, they get one wish, and they're not very specific with their words. And we all denigrate lawyers, but if only there were more lawyers in children's books to really make sure they're choosing their wishes correctly, so many problems would be solved. And eventually everybody leaves, and then it's just 4 of us left. It's my friend Jeremiah and his girlfriend Alana and another friend of theirs. And Jeremiah says, hey, you want to leave here and go to the Bulgarian bar, right? This place I think it's called like Manahata or something. It's been in New York City for like a couple decades. It's a wonderfully silly, fun bar because they play like Eastern European dance music there. And, as I mentioned, I've got this kid at home, and I'm always factoring in sleep and lack thereof, and I should probably go home. Should probably alleviate my wife, Vanessa, of the responsibilities of this child. But, with so many distractions in New York, we don't always make the best decisions. We're not always conscientious when it comes to our partners. So I'm like, yeah, let's go. And so we do. We go to the Bulgarian bar. And it's as silly and frankly stupid as always, particularly because at the end of the bar, they've got this gimmick there that is like so stupid. And I'm looking at it thinking like anyone that participates in that gimmick is therefore also stupid. And I'm like, look at that, I say to Jeremiah. And he's like, do you want to do it? And I'm like, yes. So we each pay $25 to the bartender for the privilege of each of us donning very heavy old coats that supposedly are surplus from the military of the Soviet Union. There's hammer and sickle insignias on them. We put on these hats, supposedly from officers of the Soviet Union, and some of the hats have like heavy ear flaps. And once we're all really bundled up, the 4 of us are led by the bartender into a very small closet that has glass walls so people can see inside. And it's very cold inside this closet. I think the idea is that we have all been stationed on the outskirts of Siberia, and we're all bundled up. And of course, we're naturally all miserable. And so what are we doing? We are looking at the shelves that are lining the inside of this small closet, shelves that are encrusted with ice because it's so cold. And on these shelves are just rows and rows of alcohol, which we now have 2 minutes to drink as much as we can, which is very different than as much as we want. I frankly don't want to drink any of it, I have no interest in hard alcohol, no interest in getting drunk, no interest in having a hangover, and yet I'm a very frugal person to a fault. And so if I'd paid $25 to do whatever, I am gonna bankrupt this place with as much as I'm gonna drink. I want the bartender hitting a red button that'll go directly to whatever bank is funding this bar, so the executives will be here within 2 minutes to shut the whole thing down. And maybe it'll be easier, maybe I'd be more into it if the alcohol were good alcohol, or at least varied alcohol. But instead, every single bottle is just a different kind of schnapps. And all different colors in there. And there's little shot glasses strewn around. And so we each take the shot glass, and we each take a bottle, and you fill it up, and then we clink our glass, and we put the shot down, and that's 10 seconds of the 2 minutes, right? And then you put the bottle back, grab another bottle, you do another shot, and we clink them together. And soon, it's just taking too much time to clink the shot glasses together. We're each huddled separately in our corners, just grabbing and fervently, maddeningly, just putting it all back with a craziness to it. It's amazing how quickly I or any one of us can go from being on stage and delivering a very sort of heartfelt and sober dissertation on the human condition, and then a few hours later you're no different than a raging alcoholic Soviet military who's trying to kill themselves on the outskirts of Siberia, and of course, it's not just because of the alcohol that I've suddenly had this craze taken. It's because COVID is in the air, even way back then, literally in the air, right? And like the walls of COVID are closing in. We can't see them, just as we're stuck in the four walls of this closet, not being able to really see the walls themselves, right? Like Broadway at this point has already shut down. I didn't even know if my own show was going to happen. As tonight, I wasn't entirely sure this was going to happen with this Delta variant, And I had friends tonight, I had friends back then who were like, I don't really feel comfortable coming in person to your show. And of course, I had to accept that, even though there was a little part of my ego that was crushed just to discover that, at least for them anyway, my show was not to die for, So there's a strange sort of like thing that happens to human beings, when we feel that we're losing control of the situation. We just react, not in ways that make sense. We just react for the sake of reacting, which is what we're doing in this, is by just putting all this alcohol back, wearing these coats that have been worn by how many hundreds and thousands of possibly COVID-infected people before us, with these shot glasses that have not been cleaned from whenever before someone might have drank them, other than the schnapps, I suppose, cleaning them. And at one point, I hit such a fever pitch of madness that I just wrung my tongue down an entire shelf of ice, just lapping up the schnapps that is spilled out of other bottles in some weird sort of middle finger to COVID that doesn't make any mental sense, but emotionally felt right. And at the end of a very long 2 minutes, we were let out of this closet, stumbling out, our arms draped over each other, the barman fumbling between our four phones, taking pictures of us with the flash going off, poof, 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 poof. And those pictures, the freezing, the final moment, the final before times. Because right after that, the whole city shut down. It was all shut down. All the museums, all the bars, all the restaurants, all the places we would take our little child, everything, and all of us, right? We were just suddenly sitting in our apartments. And New York City's gonna have to change its motto, It is not the city that never sleeps. Turns out there's just an on-off switch, and boop, it was turned off. And there was nowhere to go except to the supermarkets, to get food. Not that I personally called it food anymore, and maybe you're like this too, but I would always say to Vanessa, I'm going out for supplies, because suddenly that's what I was buying. Not things I wanted, but just things that came in cans. Because that's all I know about survival, is you're supposed to get cans. And the biggest can I got this really large can of pork and beans. I'm assuming you've never bought a can of pork and beans. I don't know. But this is so big, like somebody is buying massive cans of pork and beans, possibly because their families like pork and beans. Not my family. I mean, we've never talked about it, but I think that alone said, I don't even think Vanessa will utter the words pork and beans. It's not who she is, and we've been together long enough now. It should have come up, right? But she's not gonna eat it. Our daughter, we're raising her vegetarian. She doesn't know she's being raised vegetarian. She will go on at length about how much she likes chicken. Don't believe her. She's never had it, So really, this can of pork and beans ultimately is just for me, And I don't know when I'm gonna eat such a large can of pork and beans, because to open it, I don't know if it goes bad soon, but that's like 5 solid meals in a row of pork and beans that I'm committing myself to. So really, I'm well aware this can of pork, it's just a canary in the coal mine for me, But not quite like the actual canary in the coal mine, because a real canary in the coal mine would signal to the miners that there's carbon monoxide in the air and they better get out because something bad is starting to happen. This is more like a canary in the coal mine. The coal mine has already collapsed, and I'm trapped inside in the darkness for some amount of days, growing hungrier and hungrier until finally I eat the canary in the coal mine. And I'm aware that if I ever should see the contents of this can of pork and beans, it will mean it's the end. It will mean society has broken apart, and we don't know what that looks like because it hasn't happened before. And other societies that have fallen apart, there's been no one who's had the time or the inclination to write a book about it. So we don't know if it's happening, right? And I'm well aware that to see the inside of this pork, it will mean that I am seeing it with eyes that are more scared, more desperate, more anxious, more afraid than I've ever been in my entire life. 3 weeks after this is Vanessa's birthday, March 27th. And I call up my godmother, Lisa. And Lisa, she introduced my parents to each other. And so if you just go the dominoes down, she's the reason you're here right now, okay? And I say to her, I'm like, hey, can we go to Montauk, to your sweet, adorable, magical cottage out in Montauk for Vanessa's birthday? And Lisa's like, she's like, you know what? Go for longer than just a long weekend. Go for as long as you want until this whole COVID thing blows over. And so we went for as long as we want. I don't think any of us had any idea how long that would be. But we know it's going to be longer than a long weekend. And because we got a child, we got a whole lot of stuff. We got to get like so we got to rent a car. That's what we got to do. I've lived in New York City my whole adult life. I've never owned a car. And even if me telling you that we're not in service to this story I'm telling you right now, I'm sure I would work in a way to tell you that I've never had a car because it's something I'm weirdly proud of, right? Like we all have these things that you've never done, movies you've never seen, food you've never eaten, whatever, and it kind of comes to define you and you like to say it, and other people react to it like, oh my God, you've never had a car, and for whatever, it makes you feel superior. So know that if I ever tell you that I don't have a car, right, I'm letting you know that I'm superior to you. And what's weird is that I know that for people who do have cars, when they tell me that in fact they do have a car, they are in fact feeling superior to me, which I think is the most wonderful thing about cars, is that regardless of whether you have one or do not have one, everyone gets to feel superior, right? And so we rent this car, and we drive out to Montauk, and then we get rid of the car, and then we're just there. We're just there in Montauk. Way on the eastern end of Long Island with the Atlantic Ocean on 3 sides. You really feel like you're on the frontier, particularly when you don't have a car, when you're trapped there, when you're like, oh my God, like if something goes wrong, there's nothing we can do, but nothing's gonna go wrong because we're in this like perfect little tiny bubble. And the first thing I gotta do, go out and get supplies, right, at the supermarket. And I'm in one of the aisles, and there's this older gentleman out there, and he's got a mask on. I don't have a mask on. It's not been like mandated by the store. It's not quite the thing yet. And we pass each other in the aisle, and he looks at me and he's like, aren't you scared? And the truth is, I don't get sick. Like ever. I don't get the flu. I don't get the cold. Like I've never been in a hospital. I didn't have health care for 20 years. That is not an exaggeration. I just didn't have it. And then finally, because of Obamacare or whatever stuff, I got health care, and I went and I got a checkup, and he was like, you're fine. I was like, yeah, sure. One other thing, too much information here, but why not? We're talking about it. That weird moment in the checkup, like I haven't been for 20 years, and I'm like, when did this become a thing? You saw he's putting on the blue glove, and he's like, drop your pants, and then thunk with a finger right up the butt. And I'm like, wow, I'm an easy customer, like, when did this become part of the little checkup? But there it is. And he's like, yep, all feels good and clean inside there. You're good to go. So I tell him, I'm like, no, I'm not scared. And then he just continues down the aisle. Like, there's no like, hello, and there was no goodbye. Like, it's the weirdest conversation I've ever had with someone, just asking, are you scared? Me saying no, and then he's gone, but truth is, for the rest of the time I was in Montauk, when I'd go back to that store, I would wear a mask from then on out. Not because, personally, in my heart, I ever think I'm going to get it. In my mind, I know I could. But because I know that it makes other people scared to see that I don't have a mask in the store. Which, again, I think is just being part of society. But I can tell you that I didn't feel scared, and yet that sentiment is somewhat belied by the fact that when I left that supermarket, if we were to look down in my little baby carriage, which is how I had to transport food back and forth to our house, which I imagine made everyone uncomfortable seeing me on my way to the store, just wheeling an empty baby carriage and thinking to themselves, like, that's got to be the saddest story, whatever's happening there. You would have seen as I exited the store prominently in that baby carriage a very large can of pork and beans. When I have trouble sleeping, by which I mean like if I'm lying in bed for like 10 seconds and I have not already fallen asleep. I have this like scenario in my head that I go to that helps me just drift off to slumberland. Look, we're all weird because we're human beings. We've all got weird techniques for dealing with whatever we do in life. This is my weird thing. It's not a joke. It really is my go-to to fall asleep. Use it if you want and feel weird. But when I have trouble falling asleep, I just picture myself in the middle of a plane crash. Never been in a plane crash. Don't know how horrifying that really would be. I don't dwell on that in this vision. It's just the plane is going down. There's no time to think about much. And then we hit the water because it's in the middle of the ocean, and the plane just breaks apart. But through some incredible, miraculous bending of physics, my seat to which I'm strapped into just gets shot out the side, and then it like a flat rock, it skips along the calm surfaces of the ocean until I come to a rest in the middle of a huge field of debris. And I am the sole survivor of this plane crash. And I don't know everything on the plane, so I'm not dealing with that particular sort of sadness. I just know that time is short, and I have to swim around, and I have to get things I might need, like cushions to float on, and I have to find water bottles, and I have to stuff them into my little waistband, and I have to go and collect as many little airline packets of cookies as I can and stuff them into my pockets, and then before you know it, all the debris is sunk or drifted apart, and I've drifted away, and I'm completely floating now by myself in the middle of a calm ocean beneath a beautiful blue sky with a bright sun, and I'm holding an umbrella that I found in the wreckage because I don't want to get a sunburn. And before long, I've drifted off and washed up on a desert island where I immediately set about collecting coconuts. I go and I build little traps in tidal pools to get the fish. I build a shelter out of sticks and leaves in my umbrella. And then at some point it starts to rain, and I'm inside the shelter, and it's completely dry in there, and I have everything I need inside this shelter. I've got my coconuts, I've got my fish, I've got my water bottles, I've got my packets of airline cookies, and what's more, I don't have to be anywhere. I don't have to deal with any social situations. I don't have to deal with any friends who might be angry at me, or tensions, or weird social dynamics. I don't have to deal with pursuing a career. All I have to do is just go for walks in the woods and go for trips to the beach, to go swimming in the ocean. And this was always my go-to and always would work until the pandemic happened and I found myself out in Montauk. And I think it didn't work anymore out there because suddenly I was living my scenario in this shelter with everything I needed, with no social situations. We didn't know anybody in Montauk, with no career to pursue, with just long walks through the woods, trips down to the beach, and everything I need, which is to say my wife, Vanessa, and our little daughter who just turned 2. And it's so perfectly little secure out there. And I think for so many of us, that's what the pandemic was. Like, unless you were sick, unless you were dealing with somebody who was sick, you're just with a little pod of family or friends. And then it's just about the small little social dynamics between you. And somewhere far away, magical scientists are working on something that will come and save you. But for the meantime, it's just, you're just at home working on, in my case, a little tiny girl. That's my project, raising this little daughter of mine. And I know that, like, everybody thinks their child is perfect and amazing. And that's how I think too, but I think I'm right, you know? Like, I know what are the chances? What are the chances that I'm actually correct? But I never knew that I would like the baby phase of a child. I thought, like, I wait for them to grow up and then I'll learn their names, you know? But, like, It turns out it's fascinating. This little girl is fascinating. And like, she's advanced verbally, but I'll tell you this, for all the words she knows and all the grammar, she is kind of stuck into her brain. Words she does not know. She doesn't know the word pandemic. She doesn't know COVID. She doesn't know social distancing. She doesn't know lockdown. She doesn't know anxiety. She doesn't know fear. She doesn't know pain. She doesn't know want. She doesn't know friends, right? We're just this little tiny world, and I'm putting all of my time and energy into just making sure that this little girl has a life that is free of fear and pain and is something as close to perfect as can be, which is why it's just like a little bit difficult. Like in the world of all, in the realm of all the things that can go wrong in the world, this doesn't measure up there, but my world is so tiny when I'm constantly reminded by this little tiny girl that I am not the most popular of the two parents. Like, I didn't know, in anticipation of having a child, that like one parent would be the favorite of the two, but it can really stab you in the heart when you go in the morning because your little girl is woken up, and when she sees you, she just collapses in disappointment and then yells out, "I want mama." And then you have to go and get mama, which Vanessa, she doesn't want it to be this way. I mean, she doesn't want to be number two. We want to be equal, and maybe it won't always be this way, but it's this way, and I get why she likes Vanessa better. Vanessa is like our nurturer. She's like this person. We were walking down the beach this one time. This will explain everything. And all the traffic is coming in to Montauk from New York. Like other religions, they have penance. You can like self-flagellation. If you've done something wrong, you can atone for it. If you don't have a religion, just get in a car on a Friday afternoon and drive out to Montauk. It's gonna be like a hellish, torturous experience for all involved. It's so terrible. Some people, they get to Montauk and they don't even stop. They just continue the next 5 miles to the lighthouse where there's a cliff, and they just drive straight off of it, just right into the ocean where there's this graveyard of cars. Everybody's sure that whatever hell is going to meet them in the afternight, life is not nearly as bad as the hell they just experienced driving out to Montauk. And everybody is at their wits' end because they know that like they're only coming for the weekend, and like this is now half their weekend, and they're going to have to almost immediately turn around and go back to New York. And we just crossed this single lane road that goes out to Montauk, me and Vanessa and our little girl. And when we turn around and we see a car that has stopped, and then the car behind it does not stop, just crashes right into the car in front of it. And the drivers inside, they are in a fit of rage, because like they made it all the way here, and now they get into a car accident, but it's such a fit of rage that it's beyond any sort of rage that like we would recognize. It's sort of like ultraviolet rage, like it's beyond the visible spectrum, all that you can see of them inside, that they become catatonic. They just become frozen as their two cars have become married, the bumpers wedged into each other. And me, I'm looking around at other people that are near us, and I'm like, oh wow, that's a shame. I'm like, you know why that happened? That it's because they have a car. That's why that happened. This never happened to me. You have a car? Oh yeah, well, this might happen to you. It'll never happen to me because I don't have a car. And as I'm saying this, I look back up. Vanessa, meanwhile, has walked into the middle of the road in between the two cars and is now physically trying to separate them, right? With their bumpers wedged into each other. And then she's directing the car that was behind to like back up, which it slowly is doing. And one bit of its bumper is still attached to the car, but the other is broken off and wedged into the car in front. And Vanessa, she's just pulling, and she frees the bumper and is now holding the broken end of the bumper and is now directing the car to drive slowly towards her. And she is walking the bumper backwards towards the curb so that all the other angry cars that are driving around this accident can continue on their way. And the one detail here that I'm just going to tell you that doesn't lead to anything, but it's just worth worth putting in because I don't know it's not going to lead to anything, is that there's all this liquid dribbling out of the engine onto the road of the car whose bumper has broken off. And like, I don't know anything about cars, but I've seen movies and I know that oftentimes this big orange and yellow light that happens after this moment. And the really dumb part about this whole situation is that it's taken me this long to just sort of raise my hand and be like, Vanessa, no, Vanessa, And she's like, I'm trying to help them. I'm like, yeah, I know, but like any one of these cars can hit you. This catatonic driver could put the acceleration on too quickly, could run you over, knock you down. Like, no, there are people whose job it is to help these. We don't have cars for a reason. Vanessa, please, you don't even have a driver's license. And I finally get her to me on the side of the road, and I'm scared for her. And I'm like, don't ever do that again. But like, this is who Vanessa is. To a fault sometimes. She wants to help people out. She wants to take care of a situation, and her little girl is watching this, and of course she's just enthralled by it, and she's constantly thereafter asking me to tell the story of when the two cars crashed, but she doesn't call it crash. She says when the two cars fell down. And then I'll always be like, yeah, the two cars, they fell down. And then you know who stepped in and took care of it? And our daughter will go, Mama. And I'm like, that's right. Mama stepped into the road. She picked up one of the cars. She shook out the driver, threw it into the Atlantic, picked up the other cars, shook out the other, threw it into the Long Island Sound. And every time I tell this story to our daughter, I always make it a different, super heroic, solving situation for Vanessa. So no surprise that Vanessa is number one in our daughter's eyes. But at the same time, of course, it's exactly for this reason, you know, that I'm reminded in a way that I'd kind of forgotten in all the hustle and bustle of New York, what I love about Vanessa, about my wife, as I'm looking at the other people around us and being like, that's my wife. Yeah, that's my wife. She doesn't even have a car. No. She doesn't have a license. Look at her now, you know? And that's what it's been. So many of us, like we found, we either love the people that we're stuck with or we hate the people that we're stuck with. And whichever way it goes, not your fault. It's just something you discovered. But for us, it's been as a sort of wonderful little pod as beyond us and the rest of the world, you know? The planes are crashing. There's terrible disease raging. There's an awful presidency. There's riots, and then there's just the three of us making our way and sort of getting to know each other again and better. Which is why when December rolls around and 3 seasons now have come and gone and COVID is just flaring once again and they announce, oh my God, we're saved. They've discovered vaccines. And everyone's like, oh wow, this is great. So everyone's just gonna take them and we're gonna be fine. No problem at all. We experience the joy of that while at the same time being sort of like, oh, so this is this little beautiful little, it's ending, you know? And Lisa, of course, she wants her house back. She wants to be able to use it for the summer of 2021. She wants to be able to invite people out here. And so she's going to take the house back over in June. And that's great. But it's bittersweet because we've just so enjoyed being together. And of course, it means like renting another car, packing up all our stuff, driving back to New York. But Vanessa's going to be the one who's going to pack up the house because she's good at everything, and I'm the one who's going to take care of Elia because that's all I've been doing with our daughter. I've been taking care of her the entire time along with Vanessa, but like that's all I actually know how to do. And we just have like 2 days left in Montauk before I'm going to go and rent the car and go back to New York. And so I'm like, you know what, we're going to do something special. We're going to get on a local bus and we're going to take it out to East Hampton, you know? At East Hampton, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, but for those of you on the other side of those cameras out there, it's like the toniest, ritziest beachside town in all of New York, perhaps all the country, I don't know, all the world, let's just say. It's absolutely darling, it's adorable, and so no surprise that amongst the $1 million mansions there should be this little library there, and I'm going to bring our daughter to the library. I'm no good at describing architectural features which together should conspire to make us want to enter through the doors of a building, but I did read Hansel and Gretel when I was a child, as I'm sure we all did, and I'm sure we all recognize that the artists who drew those picture books surely salivated when they got to the panel where they were allowed to draw that house of candy in the middle of the woods, that house that spoke to those children deep within their hearts and compelled them to go inside. That is this library in East Hampton, not covered with candy, but just covered with the promise of books and cuteness. And we went inside knowing full well that there may be a monster, there may be a witch inside, but of course, there wasn't any to be seen, and if you know there's a monster around and you don't see any, then it's time to look in the mirror, isn't it, And I don't need to look in the mirror to know what I look like at that time, which is to say somewhat monstrous. Look, it's just the elephant in the room right now, which is to say that since that moment, I've shaved, okay? I've cut my hair. Those of you who have not been following the growth of this beard over the last year of me doing these shows, you do not know the volume, the growth of this beard on my face that I was growing from basically March 7th, 2020, and through to the end of our time in Montauk, this beard that had become so big and gray, which would precede my entrance into any room by a full 5 seconds. If you imagine like a raccoon, right, that has mistaken my chin for a female of its species and just decided to just copulate with it, that's what it would look like as I would talk with this thing on my face. And it didn't look good. And I knew it didn't look good, and you might wonder why. Why would you spend a year and a half of your life with this monstrosity on your face and the hair getting long? And I don't know, I think I was just sort of playing out a part there of someone who's been marooned on a desert island. I think I enjoyed walking around East Hampton. It's so beautiful, knowing that whenever someone saw me, I was challenging their assumptions about whether there was any homelessness in East Hampton. I liked being in the corner of the children's section with my daughter in the library, where I'm sitting on a seat that's very low to the ground and my knees are above the table, just looking like some strange animal next to this beautiful, angelic little girl reading a book together. Until, of course, it's time to change her diaper, which, she's not potty trained. She's just turned 3. We tried some potty training a couple weeks before our trip to the library. It didn't go well. I don't blame her. Convincing her to not go in her pants anymore is as difficult as it would be to convince me to just start going in mine, And if you imagine, not just to go in our pants, how difficult that would be, but then to not be able to change them right away, but to sit in them until some overlord decides it's time to put on something clean. That would be very difficult to potty train us in that way, so I don't blame her for finding it weird and difficult to do the opposite. I assume she'll grow into an adult who is potty trained, or she won't. And she'll just wear diapers from here on out, and at some point will at least learn how to change them herself. And the question is, of course, in a beautiful, beautiful building, where do you change a diaper, particularly when you look like something like a monster? Well, of course, you do it in the basement. And so we work our way down to this very large room, and in the far corner where all these folding tables and chairs, I begin to change her diaper. She's not happy. She doesn't want me to change it at all, So I'm doing it standing up because that's a little bit more agreeable to her. Because it also means that she can continue to do her acrobatic routines even as I'm changing her diaper. And you gotta understand, she's never seen videos or TV. So whatever you're imagining is acrobatics, don't imagine that. It's more just like voguing, really. She just likes to strike poses and then ask if you are able to strike that pose. So she's constantly just sort of like this, being like, can you do this? And then you try to do whatever this is, and then she'll always be like, No, that's not it. And then she'll change it and be like, actually, it's this. Can you do this? And she's like, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And so that's what she's doing. And I've also gotten a book to help distract her. A book that happens to be about Band-Aids. I don't know. And I'm hoping it's going to distract her, but my problem is that I find everything interesting. So I'm hopelessly engrossed in this book on Band-Aids as I'm changing her diaper over here as she's going through her acrobatic routines and she's in socks and the floor is slippery, which means she slips in the middle of one of her routines. But luckily I'm holding onto her arm and perhaps she would have fallen and hit her head. She doesn't, but instead she slips out and sort of twists around and I pull her up just a bit, and as I do so, the loudest pop. Yeah, when I say loudest, I don't even know if it actually made a noise. It's just a vibration through her arm and through my hand and up through my arm and then into my heart where just reverberates sickeningly as I look down at her and she begins to scream and cry just as if I have broken her arm, which like, I'd say pop. I say it popped. I don't know. We could say crack. We could say splinter. We could say it fractured. I have no idea. And of course, I'm like, oh my God, the sickness inside of me, you know, because like I don't want any little girl's arm to break. I don't want more than that for it to be my girl. More than that, I don't want to be the one that broke it. And I can't unfeel that pop through my hands, and I'm just being like, oh no, please, you know, and of course, in the midst of all this screaming and crying, and I don't know if someone's gonna come in, and I have to like put on the diaper, I have to put on the pants, I have to put on her shoes, I have to clean up the old diaper, I have to put her into a stroller, and then I have to bust out of that library out onto the street where I'm like, I have no idea where to go now, you know, to like a health clinic. I don't know where a health clinic might be, and even if I did, I have no way to get there because I do not have a car. And all I can do is just like sort of push her around on the stroller and hope that like this is just a temporary little thing that's gone wrong. And she falls asleep in the stroller. And I'm like, oh my God, okay. Can you fall asleep in a stroller if your little girl has just broken her arm, even though she's holding onto her arm, you know, she's just falling asleep as she's holding onto it. And then, you know what happens? I mean, it starts to rain. It starts to rain, and unlike some sort of stupid fantasy where I'm floating in the middle of the ocean, I do not have an umbrella. Out of a perfectly blue sky, it just starts to rain right on her, and she wakes right up and just begins screaming and crying again that it hurts. And a bus comes along, and so we get on the bus, and we take it the half hour back to Montauk, and then I wheel her back to her house, and I tell Vanessa, I'm like, I think I maybe did not break her arm, you know? And she looks at her, and she's like, it's okay, it was an accident, whatever happened. I'm like, I know it was an accident, but I did it, you know, I felt it, and it's like my whole job for the past year and a half has just been to protect this tiny little girl, and there is nowhere we can bring her now because there is no health clinic in Montauk, and the one that exists in East Hampton where I've just come from, it's closed now, and it doesn't open again until 9 the next morning, and we don't even know if that is where we should bring her. We don't know if our health insurance will be applicable there, and we have no way to get there, and all we can do is just sort of ride out this absolutely terrible night where she's crying. She's saying like the most awful thing any parent can hear. She's just yelling out. She's saying, help me, and we can't. We just have to wait till 9 in the morning, and our whole life, you could feel the whole life has just suddenly gone off onto a different track. We're like, we're not packing up the house anymore. Well, I guess I'm not going off to rent a car. We're not going back to New York. I don't know what Lisa's going to do with her friends coming here. We are going to instead have to go and find some health clinic. And like, I don't know if I've hurt her arm for like the rest of her life. I don't know how long this is. I don't know any of it. And it's reality is so tenuous, right? It's like, we believe we're like progressing with our lives, that we're a part of a story that makes sense, that is beginning, a middle, and an end. But then we discover in moments like this that no, like all of a sudden it just becomes about something else, as it has for so many people in this country, right? You know, 610, is that what we're up to now? 1,000 people who've died, and every single one of them, this was not part of the plan. This is nothing they expected. And other people who have this disease that are dealing with long COVID now, we have families of these people who all of a sudden that's their life. And of course, it's not even just COVID people. It's like a regular life. I have 5 different friends my age who lost a parent this year. Not from COVID, just from getting old. And then that became their lives just suddenly on another track, like as if we actually have no control over which direction we're headed. And you have these moments here like this where you realize exactly how helpless you are. As Vanessa's saying to me, she's like, one of us should get some sleep tonight. And this is why Vanessa's number 1 and I'm number 2. And she's like, you go get some sleep. But I can only sleep for an hour and a half at a time because that's how often our little girl wakes up crying. And in the morning, I go back and I get into bed with the 2 of them. And our girl wants me to hold her arm. And we're just waiting for 9 o'clock to come. And it's like 8:45 in the morning, and I'm sitting her up so she can have a little bit of water, and I'm holding her arm, so I just feel another loud pop through her arm, and she begins screaming again, and I'm just have to leave the room, and I feel like so like hapless and so stupid, and I see myself in the mirror, and I'm like, what are you doing, and what are you doing out here, and like, what is this whole thing, and like, why do you keep hurting this little girl, the one thing that you've been trying to protect, the one thing you've done for the past whole year and a half. And I walk back into the bedroom, and there's a little girl on the bed, and she's got her hands behind her head, and then her feet she's arching her entire back, like she's looking at me upside down. And from her upside down pose, she's asking me, can you do this? And then she collapses in the bed. And then she twists her leg around and she says, can you do this? And then she like does the other way and she goes like that. She says, can you do this? And she can do this. And she's going through a whole series of routines without a hint of pain anywhere within that tiny little body. As Vanessa and I are looking at each other, we're like, what is going on here? As she's, not only is there no hint of any physical pain, but there's apparently no emotional pain either. She's not like, wow, I feel better, or like, oh my God, that was a rough night, or like, wow, we didn't get any sleep at all, did we? I mean, apparently, when I sat her up in bed and there was that secondary pop, I must have popped back into place whatever had become unpopped. And after that initial outburst that she made, just something's ever, it's all gone. In some miraculous way, gone, just as if none of it ever happened. And that whole little detour of our life is like, oh no, we're just back on the way we were going, right? I guess we're just packing again. I guess I'm just going and renting a car again. I guess we're just getting in that car and then driving back to New York, which we did, right back here to this city. And this, we've been sort of in a de facto quarantine out there in Montauk, but New York, as you know, it's been like out and open for a while now, and there's tons of people walking around, no one wearing a mask in any bar or restaurant, and it's summertime, and everybody's out, and everybody's feeling good, and it's just like none of this ever happened. Like not entirely, of course, but there's this strange feeling like we've thought so much about the aftertime. And you imagine like, oh, when we finally get back and we see each other again, it's going to be a celebration, you know? And we're going to hold love for each other in our hearts, and all our problems, we'll realize that they're petty and small, and we'll see the things that unite us instead of divide us. And it's not like that. It's all just sort of like, whatever. It's too early to say what the takeaway is from this past 16 months, but the lesson might be that we've learned no lesson at all as a society that is just as much at war with itself as it has ever been. And Vanessa and the little girl, they're going off to Canada, right, to see Vanessa's parents. And Vanessa says to me, she's like, you know that raccoon on your face? She's like, we're growing that as a sort of a measure of this pandemic. But this pandemic, it seems like it's kind of past, you know, or is passing. This is before the Delta variant is surging again, you know, but it seemed like, okay, maybe with vaccines that we will all take, we're moving past it. And she's like, I'd love to see your chin again before I go to Canada for 5 weeks. And so I do. I go to a barber, and I get a shave and a haircut. Never done that before, you know? It's just like, and then all of a sudden, 20 minutes or whatever later, I'm looking in the mirror, I'm like, oh, that's just me. That's me pre-March 7th, 2020. I just look the way I always looked, as if none of that ever happened at all. And now Vanessa and the babe, they've gone off to Canada, and I'm just in my apartment now. And it's like sometime from before I had a child, sometime from before I got married. And these fringe festivals that I tour to and do shows at, they're not happening. So I'm just living in the city in some sort of weird, sort of before timeless age. And it's very disorienting, and it's very hard to know what we should make of this. And again, I know we're still in the middle of this. We're still being throttled by COVID, and maybe it just needs to keep hitting us on the head a few more times before we're all like, oh, right. We do all have a common enemy. We should all be friends and love each other. Perhaps the story won't and shouldn't be told for years and years and years, right? You know, way too early to try and sum it up right here. The story perhaps will only be told 100 years from now, 110 years from now, when the very last person who has any actual personal memory of COVID is still barely just alive. And of course, we know who that person will be. If she lives long enough, it'll be my daughter, right? 110 years from now, she'll be 113. That's the year 2131. And she'll be on her bed. She won't be able to walk anymore. And everyone around her will be like whispering. They'll be like, she was alive during the pandemic of 2020 and 21. And no one will be able to believe, right? And they'll be asking her, they're like, can you tell us what it was like? What you remember? And she will tell them, and they'll all be amazed at how good she is at remembering what happened during this pandemic. They'll be like, how is your memory so good? And she'll be like, well, my secret is, I haven't really told the world, but like, I invented a time machine, and I traveled back in time, and I watched every single show that my father put on. I was in the bushes when he was broadcasting from the back door out in Montauk. I was there. I even appeared at the very end of his last show in New York, which there's still time, she still might appear. And if she does appear here, we'll all be like, oh my God, that's his daughter. And she'll start crying because like I'm alive and I'm young, you know, and I'll be so proud of her. I'll be like, you invented a time machine. We all thought that was impossible. That is amazing, you know. And she'll you know, we'll be able to embrace, and all of you'll be like the tears and the clapping. It'll be incredible. You'll all be like, this is why we love theater, live theater, you know, and it's an awesome show. And we'll look at her and they'll be like, you know, and she'll be like, I just want to say, Daddin, because that's what she calls me. At a very early age, they were like, she called me Dada for like a week, and then it became Daddin. And I love the fact that like we named her and then she named me, and so my name is Daddin, and she'll say Daddin. She's like, I just want you to know that even though you are number 2, I still cherish those moments when you would bring me to the beach, when you would dig the holes and you'd dig a little shelf for me to sit on in those holes, when you would take me to the edge of the ocean in Montauk. And I have memories of you swinging me out over the ocean. I love the memory I have of sitting with you and Mama on a couch in the middle of the night, looking out the window for my very first lightning and thunderstorm, and feeling so safe there. I've loved going for the walks with you in the woods. I loved playing hide and seek, even though I had no idea about the rules, but I enjoyed playing with you. I loved dancing with you every morning as you made breakfast, dancing to Dua Lipa and ABBA and Duran Duran and LCD Sound System and Love and Rockets. And I just want you to know, I have no memory of what happened to my arm. And you always made me feel safe and cared for and loved. And I love you for that, Dad. And everyone gathered around her as she lays in her bed at the age of 113. It will say, you know, do you have any other memories, you know, that you remember that are not part of the shows and the time machines? And she'll be like, yes, I do. There's one other thing I remember. In the kitchen, in Montauk, there was a pantry there. I seem to remember there was a very large can of something. I don't know what was inside the can because the can was never opened. And that's the show. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Hey. Thank you all so much for coming. You know, we're here, we're back. Thank you to the horse trade and to Joey in the booth and to Hooker and to Lily and for being the front of house staff and to you know, keeping this physical space going and putting in these cameras and getting the air. There's so many things that this space had to do and Erez had to make happen, and he's made it happen, and God bless, you know. It's really been like this project of doing this show every 5 to 6 weeks over the past year. Like, I didn't know it would go for a year. I just kept doing it, thinking to myself, I'll do it as long as people seem interested in it. As long as it seems to mean something to somebody outside of myself, because it certainly has meant something to me. And it's been a lot of work. There's always an amount of anxiety to know, like, is the show actually going to happen? But I just want to thank everybody who's been a part of this journey. And surely there'll be other shows along the way. But thank you all again so much for coming. And I suppose I should just say that if anybody wants to go for a drink after the show, let's not go to Phoebe's. There's a KGB bar right upstairs. Let's meet there. I'll be there in 20 minutes after I have my moment with myself in the mirror backstage. Thank you so much for coming, and have a great night.